Welcome to Bedtime Universe and the short stories by the Bonfire series. In this series, I calmly read short stories with the soothing sounds of a bonfire in the forest to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Tonight, I'll be reading The Age for Love by Paul Bourget. So, as always, settle comfortably into bed, close your eyes, and begin by taking a deep breath. When I submitted the plan of my inquiry upon the age for love to the editor-in-chief of the Boulevard, the highest type of French literary paper, he seemed astonished that an idea so journalistic, that was his word, should have been evolved from the brain of his most recent acquisition. I had been with him 2 weeks, and it was my first contribution. "Give me some details, my dear Labath," he said, in a somewhat less insolent manner than was his wont. After listening to me for a few moments, he continued, "That is good. You will go and interview certain men and women, first upon the age at which one loves the most, next upon the age when one is most loved. Is that your idea? And now, to whom will you go first?" "I have prepared a list," I replied, and took from my pocket a sheet of paper. I had jotted down the names of a number of celebrities whom I proposed to interview on this all-important question, and I began to read over my list. It contained 2 ex-government officials, a general, a Dominican father, 4 actresses, 2 cafe concert singers, 4 actors, 2 financiers, 2 lawyers, a surgeon, and a lot of literary celebrities. At some of the names my chief would nod his approval. At others, he would say curtly, with an affectation of American manners, "Bad, strike it off," until I came to the name I had kept for the last, that of Pierre Fauchery, the famous novelist. "Strike that off," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "He is not on good terms with us." "And yet," I suggested, "is there anyone whose opinion would be of greater interest to reading men as well as to women?" I had even thought of beginning with him. "The devil you had," interrupted the editor-in-chief. "It is one of Fauchery's principles not to see any reporters. I have sent him 10, if I have one, and he has shown them all the door. The Boulevard does not relish such treatment, so we have given him some pretty hard hits. Nevertheless, I will have an interview with Fauchery for the Boulevard," was my reply. "I am sure of it." "If you succeed," he replied, "I'll raise your salary. That man makes me tired with his scorn of newspaper notoriety. He must take his share of it, like the rest. But you will not succeed. What makes you think you can? Permit me to tell you my reason later. In 48 hours, you will see whether I have succeeded or not. Go, and do not spare the fellow." Decidedly, I had made some progress as a journalist, even in my 2 weeks' apprenticeship, if I could permit Pascal to speak in this way of the man I most admired among living writers. Since that not far distant time, when tired of being poor, I had made up my mind to cast my lot with the multitude in Paris, I had tried to lay aside my old self, as lizards do their skins, and I had almost succeeded. In a former time that was but yesterday, I knew, for in a drawer full of poems, dramas, and half-finished tales I had proof of it, that there had once existed a certain Jules Labarthe who had come to Paris with the hope of becoming a great man. That person believed in literature with a capital L, in the ideal, another capital, in glory, a third capital. He was now dead and buried. Would he someday, his position assured, begin to write once more from pure love of his art? Possibly, but for the moment I knew only the energetic, practical Labarthe, who had joined the procession with the idea of getting into the front rank and of obtaining as soon as possible an income of 30,000 francs a year. What would it matter to this second individual if that vile Pascal should boast of having stolen a march on the most delicate, the most powerful of the airs of Balzac, since I, the new Labarthe, was capable of looking forward to an operation which required about as much delicacy as some of the performances of my editor-in-chief, I had, as a matter of fact, a sure means of obtaining the interview. It was this. When I was young and simple, I had sent some verses and stories to Pierre Fauchery, the same verses and stories the refusal of which by 4 editors had finally made me decide to enter the field of journalism. The great writer was traveling at this time, but he had replied to me. I had responded by a letter, to which he again replied, this time with an invitation to call upon him. I went. I did not find him. I went again. I did not find him that time. Then, a sort of timidity prevented my returning to the charge, so I had never met him. He knew me only as the young Elia of my 2 epistles. This is what I counted upon to extort from him, the favor of an interview which he certainly would refuse to a mere newspaper man. My plan was simple: to present myself at his house, to be received, to conceal my real occupation, to sketch vaguely a subject for a novel in which there should occur a discussion upon the age for love, to make him talk, and then, when he should discover his conversation in print. Here I began to feel some remorse, but I stifled it with the terrible phrase, the struggle for life, and also by the recollection of numerous examples culled from the firm with which I now had the honor of being connected. The morning after I had had this very literary conversation with my honorable director, I rang at the door of the small house in the Rue des Bourgs Valmont, where Pierre Fauchery lived, in a retired corner of Passy. Having taken up my pen to tell a plain, unvarnished tale, I do not see how I can conceal the wretched feeling of pleasure which, as I rang the bell, warmed my heart at the thought of the good joke I was about to play on the owner of this peaceful abode. Even after making up one's mind to the sacrifices I had decided upon, there is always left a trace of envy for those who have triumphed in the melancholy struggle for literary supremacy. It was a real disappointment to me when the servant replied, ill-humouredly, that Monsieur Fauchery was not in Paris. I asked when he would return. The servant did not know. I asked for his address. The servant did not know that. Poor lion, who thought he had secured anonymity for his holiday. A half hour later, I had discovered that he was staying for the present at the Château de Proby, near Namur. I had merely had to make inquiries of his publisher. 2 hours later, I bought my ticket at the Gare de Lyon for the little town chosen by Balzac as the scene for his delicious story of Ursule Mirouet. I took a traveling bag and was prepared to spend the night there. In case I failed to see the master that afternoon, I had decided to make sure of him the next morning. Exactly 7 hours after the servant, faithful to his trust, had declared that he did not know where his master was staying, I was standing in the hall of the chateau, waiting for my card to be sent up. I had taken care to write on it a reminder of our conversation of the year before, and this time, after a 10-minute wait in the hall, during which I noticed, with singular curiosity and malice, 2 very elegant and very pretty young women going out for a walk, I was admitted to his presence. Aha, I said to myself, this then is the secret of his exile. The interview promises well. The novelist received me in a cozy little room with a window opening onto the park, already beginning to turn yellow with the advancing autumn. A wood fire burned in the fireplace and lighted up the walls, which were hung with flowered cretonne, and on which could be distinguished several colored English prints representing cross-country rides and the jumping of hedges. Here was the worldly environment with which Fauchery is so often reproached, but the books and papers that littered the table bore witness that the present occupant of this charming retreat remained a substantial man of letters. His habit of constant work was still further attested by his face, which I admit gave me all at once a feeling of remorse for the trick I was about to play him. If I had found him the snobbish pretender whom the weekly newspapers were in the habit of ridiculing, it would have been a delight to outwit his diplomacy. But no, I saw, as he put down his pen to receive me, a man about 57 years old, with a face that bore the marks of reflection, eyes tired from sleeplessness, a brow heavy with thought, who said as he pointed to an easy chair, "You will excuse me, my dear confrère, for keeping you waiting." I, his dear confrère. Ah, if he had known. "You see," and he pointed to the page still wet with ink, "that man cannot be free from the slavery of furnishing copy. One has less facility at my age than at yours. Now, let us speak of yourself. How do you happen to be at Nemours? What have you been doing since the story and the verses you were kind enough to send me?" It is vain to try to sacrifice once for all one's youthful ideals. When a man has loved literature as I loved it at 20, he cannot be satisfied at 26 to give up his early passion, even at the bidding of implacable necessity. So Pierre Fauchery remembered my poor verses. He had actually read my story. His illusion proved it. Could I tell him at such a moment that since the creation of those first works I had despaired of myself, and that I had changed my gun to the other shoulder? The image of the Boulevard office rose suddenly before me. I heard the voice of the editor-in-chief saying, "Interview Fauchery? You will never accomplish that." So, faithful to my self-imposed role, I replied, "I have retired to Nemours to work upon a novel called The Age for Love, and it is on this subject that I wish to consult you, my dear master." It seemed to me, it may possibly have been an illusion, that at the announcement of the so-called title of my so-called novel, a smile and a shadow flitted over Fauchery's eyes and mouth. A vision of the two young women I had met in the hall came back to me. Was the author of so many great masterpieces of analysis about to live a new book before writing it? I had no time to answer this question, for, with a glance at an onyx vase containing some cigarettes of Turkish tobacco, he offered me one, lighted one himself, and began first to question, then to reply to me. I listened while he thought aloud and had almost forgotten my Machiavellian combination. So keen was my relish of the joyous intimacy of this communion with a mind I had passionately loved in his works. He was the first of the great writers of our day, whom I had thus approached on something like terms of intimacy. As we talked, I observed the strange similarity between his spoken and his written words. I admired the charming simplicity with which he abandoned himself to the pleasures of imagination, his superabundant intelligence, the liveliness of his impressions, and his total absence of arrogance and of pose. "There is no such thing as an age for love," he said in substance, because the man capable of loving, in the complex and modern sense of love, as a sort of ideal exaltation, never ceases to love. I will go further. He never ceases to love the same person. You know the experiment that a contemporary physiologist tried with a series of portraits to determine in what the indefinable resemblances called family likeness consisted? He took photographs of 20 persons of the same blood. Then he photographed these photographs on the same plate, one over the other. In this way, he discovered the common features which determined the type. Well, I am convinced that if we could try a similar experiment and photograph one upon another the pictures of the different women whom the same man has loved or thought he had loved in the course of his life, we should discover that all these women resembled one another. The most inconsistent have cherished one and the same being through 5 or 6 or even 20 different embodiments. The main point is to find out at what age they have met the woman who approaches nearest to the one whose image they have constantly borne within themselves. For them, that would be the age for love. "The age for being loved," he continued. "The deepest of all the passions I have ever known a man to inspire was in the case of one of my masters, a poet, and he was 60 years old at the time. It is true that he still held himself as erect as a young man. He came and went with a step as light as yours. He conversed like Rivarol. He composed verses as beautiful as De Vigny's. He was besides very poor, very lonely, and very unhappy, having lost one after another, his wife and his children. You remember the words of Shakespeare's Moor: "She loved me for the dangers I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them." So it was that this great artist inspired in a beautiful, noble, and wealthy young Russian woman a devotion so passionate that because of him she never married. She found a way to take care of him, day and night, in spite of his family, during his last illness, and at the present time, having bought from his heirs all of the poet's personal belongings, she keeps the apartment where he lived, just as it was at the time of his death. That was years ago. In her case, she found in a man 3 times her own age, the person who corresponded to a certain ideal which she carried in her heart. Look at Goethe, at Lamartine, and at many others. To depict feelings on this high plane, you must give up the process of minute and insignificant observation, which is the bane of the artists of today, in order that a 60-year-old lover should appear neither ridiculous nor odious. You must apply to him what the elder Corneille so proudly said of himself in his lines to the Marquise: "Have the courage to analyze great emotions, to create characters who shall be lofty and true. The whole art of the analytical novel lies there." As he spoke, the master had such a light of intellectual certainty in his eyes that to me he seemed the embodiment of one of those great characters he had been urging me to describe. It made me feel that the theory of this man, himself almost a sexagenarian, that at any age one may inspire love, was not unreasonable. The contrast between the world of ideas in which he moved and the atmosphere of the literary shop in which, for the last few months, I had been stifling, was too strong. The dreams of my youth were realized in this man, whose gifts remained unimpaired after the production of 30 volumes, and whose face, growing old, was a living illustration of the beautiful saying, "Since we must wear out, let us wear out nobly." His slender figure bespoke the austerity of long hours of work. His firm mouth showed his decision of character. His brow, with its deep furrows, had the paleness of the paper over which he so often bent. And yet, the refinement of his hands, so well cared for, the sober elegance of his dress, and an aristocratic air that was natural to him, showed that the finer professional virtues had been cultivated in the midst of a life of frivolous temptations. These temptations had been no more of a disturbance to his ethical and spiritual nature than the academic honors, the financial successes, the numerous editions that had been his. Withal, he was an awfully good fellow, for after having talked at great length with me, he ended by saying, "Since you are staying in Nemours, I hope to see you often, and today I cannot let you go without presenting you to my hostess." What could I say? This was the way in which a mere reporter on the boulevard found himself installed at a 5 o'clock tea table in the salon of a chateau, where surely no newspaper man had ever before set foot, and was presented as a young poet and novelist of the future to the old Marquise de Proby, whose guest the master was. This amiable, wide-haired dowager questioned me upon my alleged work, and I replied equivocally, with blushes, which the good lady must have attributed to bashful timidity. Then, as though some evil genius had conspired to multiply the witnesses of my bad conduct, the 2 young women whom I had seen going out returned in the midst of my unlooked-for visit. Ah, my interview with this student of femininity upon the age for love was about to have a living commentary. How it would illumine his words to hear him conversing with these new arrivals. One was a young girl of possibly 20, a Russian if I rightly understood the name. She was rather tall, with a long face lighted up by 2 very gentle black eyes, singular in their fire and intensity. She bore a striking resemblance to the portrait attributed to Francia in the Salon Carré of the Louvre, which goes by the name of the Man in Black, dark as the color of his clothes and his mantle. About her mouth and nostrils was that same subdued nervousness, that same restrained feverishness, which gives to the portrait its striking qualities. I had not been there a quarter of an hour before I had guessed, from the way she watched and listened to Fauchery, what a passionate interest the old master inspired in her. When he spoke, she paid rapt attention. When she spoke to him, I felt her voice shiver, if I may use the word, and he glorious rider, surfeited with triumphs, exhausted by his labors, seemed, as soon as he felt the radiance of her glance of ingenuous idolatry, to recover that vivacity, that elasticity of impression, which is the sovereign grace of youthful lovers. I understand now why he cited Goethe and the young girl of Marienbad, said I to myself with a laugh, as my hired carriage sped on toward Nemours. He was thinking of himself. He is in love with that child, and she is in love with him. We shall hear of his marrying her. There's a wedding that will call forth copy, and when Pascal hears that I witnessed the courtship, but just now I must think of my interview. Won't Fauchery be surprised to read it day after tomorrow in his paper? But does he read the papers? It may not be right, but what harm will it do him? Besides, it's a part of the struggle for life. It was by such reasoning, I remember, the reasoning of a man determined to arrive, that I tried to lull to sleep the inward voice that cried, "You have no right to put on paper, to give to the public what this noble writer said to you," supposing that he was receiving a poet, not a reporter. But I heard also the voice of my chief saying, "You will never succeed." And this second voice, I am ashamed to confess, triumphed over the other, with all the more ease because I was obliged to do something to kill time. I reached Nemours too late for the train, which would have brought me back to Paris about dinner time. At the old inn, they gave me a room which was clean and quiet, a good place to write. So I spent the evening until bedtime composing the first of the articles which were to form my inquiry. I scribbled away under the vivid impressions of the afternoon, my powers as well as my nerves, spurred by a touch of remorse. Yes, I scribbled 4 pages, which would have been no disgrace to the Journal des Goncourt, that exquisite manual of the perfect reporter. It was all there, my journey, my arrival at the chateau, a sketch of the quaint 18th century building, with its fringe of trees and its well-kept walks, the master's room, the master himself, and his conversation, the tea at the end, and the smile of the old novelist in the midst of a circle of admirers, old and young. It lacked only a few closing lines. I will add these in the morning, I thought, and went to bed with a feeling of duty performed. Such is the nature of a writer, under the form of an interview I had done, and I knew it, the best work of my life. What happens while we sleep? Is there, unknown to us, a secret and irresistible ferment of ideas while our senses are closed to the impressions of the outside world? Certain it is that on awakening I am apt to find myself in a state of mind very different from that in which I went to sleep. I had not been awake 10 minutes before the image of Pierre Fauchery came up before me, and at the same time the thought that I had taken a base advantage of the kindness of his reception of me became quite unbearable. I felt a passionate longing to see him again, to ask his pardon for my deception. I wished to tell him who I was, with what purpose I had gone to him, and that I regretted it. But there was no need of a confession. It would be enough to destroy the pages I had written the night before. With this idea I arose. Before tearing them up, I reread them. And then, any writer will understand me. And then they seemed to me so brilliant that I did not tear them up. Fauchery is so intelligent, so generous, was the thought that crossed my mind. What is there in this interview, after all, to offend him? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Even if I should go to him again this very morning, tell him my story, and that upon the success of my little inquiry, my whole future as a journalist might depend. When he found that I had had 5 years of poverty and hard work without accomplishing anything, and that I had had to go onto a paper in order to earn the very bread I ate, he would pardon me, he would pity me, and he would say, "Publish your interview." Yes, but what if he should forbid my publishing it? But no, he would not do that. I passed the morning in considering my latest plan. A certain shyness made it very painful to me, but it might at the same time conciliate my delicate scruples, my amour propre as an ambitious chronicler, and the interests of my pocketbook. I knew that Pascal had the name of being very generous with an interview article if it pleased him. And besides, had he not promised me a reward if I succeeded with fauchery? In short, I had decided to try my experiment when, after a hasty breakfast, I saw, on stepping into the carriage I had had the night before, a Victoria with coat of arms drive rapidly past, and was stunned at recognizing Fauchery himself, apparently lost in a gloomy reverie that was in singular contrast to his high spirits of the night before. A small trunk on the coachman's seat was a sufficient indication that he was going to the station. The train for Paris left in 12 minutes, time enough for me to pack my things pell-mell into my valise and hurriedly to pay my bill. The same carriage which was to have taken me to the Château de Proby carried me to the station at full speed, and when the train left, I was seated in an empty compartment opposite the famous writer, who was saying to me, "You too, deserting Nemours? Like me, you work best in Paris." The conversation begun in this way might easily have led to the confession I had resolved to make, but in the presence of my unexpected companion, I was seized with an unconquerable shyness. Moreover, he inspired me with a curiosity which was quite equal to my shyness. Any number of circumstances, from a telegram from a sick relative to the most commonplace matter of business, might have explained his sudden departure from the chateau where I had left him so comfortably installed the night before. But that the expression of his face should have changed, as it had, that in 18 hours he should have become the careworn, discouraged being he now seemed, when I had left him so pleased with life, so happy, so assiduous in his attentions to that pretty girl, Mademoiselle de Roussy, who loved him, and whom he seemed to love, was a mystery which took complete possession of me, this time without any underlying professional motive. He was to give me the key before we reached Paris. At any rate, I shall always believe that part of his conversation was in an indirect way a confidence. He was still unstrung by the unexpected incident which had caused both his hasty departure and the sudden metamorphosis in what he himself, if he had been writing, would have called his intimate heaven. The story he told me was per sfogarsi, as Bayle loved to say. His idea was that I would not discover the real hero. I shall always believe that it was his own story under another name, and I love to believe it because it was so exactly his way of looking at things. It was apropos of the supposed subject of my novel. Oh, irony! Apropos of the real subject of my interview that he began. I have been thinking about our conversation and about your book, and I am afraid that I expressed myself badly yesterday. When I said that one may love and be loved at any age, I ought to have added that sometimes this love comes too late. It comes when one no longer has the right to prove to the loved one how much she is loved, except by love's sacrifice. I should like to share with you a human document, as they say today, which is in itself a drama with a denouement. But I must ask you not to use it, for the secret is not my own. With the assurance of my discretion, he went on. I had a friend, a companion of my own age, who, when he was 20, had loved a young girl. He was poor, she was rich. Her family separated them. The girl married someone else, and almost immediately afterwards she died. My friend lived. Someday you will know for yourself that it is almost as true to say that one recovers from all things as that there is nothing which does not leave its scar. I had been the confidant of his serious passion, and I became the confidant of the various affairs that followed that first ineffaceable disappointment. He felt, he inspired other loves, he tasted other joys, he endured other sorrows, and yet when we were alone, and when we touched upon those confidences that come from the heart's depths, the girl who was the ideal of his 20th year reappeared in his words. How many times he has said to me, "In others, I have always looked for her, and as I have never found her, I have never truly loved anyone but her." And had she loved him? I interrupted. He did not think so, replied Fauchery. At least she had never told him so. Well, you must now imagine my friend at my age or almost there. You must picture him growing grey, tired of life, and convinced that he had at last discovered the secret of peace. At this time he met, while visiting some relatives in a country house, a mere girl of 20, who was the image, the haunting image of her whom he had hoped to marry 30 years before. It was one of those strange resemblances which extend from the color of the eyes to the timbre of the voice, from the smile to the thought, from the gestures to the finest feelings of the heart. I could not, in a few disjointed phrases, describe to you the strange emotions of my friend. It would take pages and pages to make you understand the tenderness, both present and at the same time retrospective, for the dead through the living, the hypnotic condition of the soul, which does not know where dreams and memories end and present feeling begins, the daily commingling of the most unreal thing in the world, the phantom of a lost love, with the freshest, the most actual, the most irresistibly naive and spontaneous thing in it, a young girl. She comes, she goes, she laughs, she sings. You go about with her in the intimacy of country life, and at her side walks one long dead. After 2 weeks of almost careless abandon to the dangerous delights of this inward agitation, imagine my friend entering by chance, one morning, one of the less frequented rooms of the house, a gallery, where, among other pictures, hung a portrait of himself painted when he was 25. He approaches the portrait abstractedly. There had been a fire in the room, so that a slight moisture dimmed the glass which protected the pastel, and on this glass, because of this moisture, he sees distinctly the trace of 2 lips which had been placed upon the eyes of the portrait. 2 small, delicate lips, the sight of which makes his heart beat. He leaves the gallery, questions a servant, who tells him that no one but the young woman he has in mind has been in the room that morning. "What then?" I asked as he paused. My friend returned to the gallery, looked once more at the adorable imprint of the most innocent, the most passionate of caresses. A mirror hung nearby, where he could compare his present with his former face, the man he was with the man he had been. He never told me, and I never asked what his feelings were at that moment. Did he feel that he was too culpable to have inspired a passion in a young girl, whom he would have been a fool, almost a criminal, to marry? Did he comprehend that through his age, which was so apparent, it was his youth which this child loved? Did he remember, with a keenness that was all too sad, that other, who had never given him a kiss like that at a time when he might have returned it? I only know that he left the same day, determined never again to see one whom he could no longer love, as he had loved the other, with the hope, the purity, the soul of a man of 20. A few hours after this conversation, I found myself once more in the office of the Boulevard, seated in Pascal's den, and he was saying, "Already? Have you accomplished your interview with Pierre Fauchery?" "He would not even receive me," I replied boldly. "What did I tell you?" he sneered, shrugging his big shoulders. "We'll get even with him on his next volume. But you know, Labarthe, as long as you continue to have that innocent look about you, you can't expect to succeed in newspaper work." I bore with the ill humor of my chief. What would he have said if he had known that I had in my pocket an interview, and in my head an anecdote which were material for a most successful story? And he has never had either the interview or the story. Since then, I have made my way in the line where he said I should fail. I have lost my innocent look, and I earn my 30,000 francs a year, and more. I have never had the same pleasure in the printing of the most profitable, the most brilliant article that I had in consigning to oblivion the sheets relating my visit to Nemours. I often think that I have not served the cause of letters as I wanted to, since, with all my laborious work, I have never written a book. And yet, when I recall the irresistible impulse of respect which prevented me from committing toward a dearly loved master a most profitable but infamous indiscretion, I say to myself, if you have not served the cause of letters, you have not betrayed it. And this is the reason, now that Fauchery is no longer of this world, that it seems to me that the time has come for me to relate my first interview. There is none of which I am more proud. That was the end of the age for love. I will let the bonfire keep going for a while, so you can stay relaxed and peacefully drift off to sleep. If sleep doesn't come right away, remember that laying still and resting peacefully is still valuable for your body and mind. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you next time.